Stay tuned guys, because in this video I'm going to show you the best way to prepare a skirting for painting. Hey, what's up guys, JB here and thanks for tuning in. So if this is your first time to my channel, then why don't you go ahead and subscribe, that'll be fantastic. Now, as I've said, I'm going to show you the best way to prepare a skirting, or in particular this skirting, for painting. Now, if you have checked out some other videos on YouTube, you would have noticed that people do the preparation and painting in a few different ways. So I'm going to show you the best way, and from my experience, what has worked best over the years. Now, this skirting has been painted. This is a top coat here. So obviously there's no need for any undercoat or primer. However, if I was putting primer or undercoat on there and I was also painting the wall, I would allow this undercoat to hit the wall, so then when I painted the wall and the skirting, it would give me a nice straight line here. But because I'm keeping the wall paint, in other words, I'm not going to be repainting the wall here, I do need to cut in with the top coat along here. So when I sand it, I need to make sure that I'm not ruining the wall here. I don't want to start rubbing away any paint off the wall. What you must do here before painting is make sure that you rub this down so you get a nice kind of rough surface that will allow the new paint to stick to. Now, I'm only going to use a bit of 120 paper on here because I just lightly need to scratch or key the surface. That will allow the paint to stick and adhere a lot better. This is quite shiny and very smooth. If I put the paint straight on top of this, it won't be long before it starts peeling off. I've got my piece of 120 sandpaper, a good sized piece, folded over. That'll give you good grip on one side as you sand. 120 grit paper isn't too coarse, but over time it will roughen up your fingers. So if you want to keep those soft hands, then make sure you put a pair of gloves on. It's also worth checking just before you start sanding that there is no food or grime on the skirting, because that's going to clog up your sandpaper and that's not cool. If you're doing any kind of sanding, make sure you've got yourself a suitable dust mask. So just using my thumb underneath the paper here as a guide, I'm just going to run that along the top of the skirting, and that way I'm not going to hit the wall or start rubbing off any of the paint. Now the top surface is done, I'm going to sand the face of the skirting here. And what you want to do is allow the sandpaper to actually tuck behind the carpet here, because we are going to paint the skirting quite deep behind this carpet. So do make sure that the paper goes down under the carpet as we move backwards and forwards. Now, you don't need to go mad here. You'll start to notice that the skirting becomes scratched, and that is about as far as you want to go. We have got a slight radius on this skirting, so what I'm going to do here is just rip a smaller piece of paper and just round that over like so, just so we can sand and just scratch that radius. Again, just don't go too mad here, because it's on the radius. You're very likely to take too much paint off if you apply too much pressure. Once the sheen or the shine of the skirting has gone, then you know you've sanded it enough. Great. Once you've done the sanding, you can hoover up. Oops, I mean vacuum. not hoover. So only once I've done all the sanding and vacuuming will I then mask up, because you don't really want to mask up then start sanding and making a mess, because then you're going to get all the dust and bits over your masking tape as well, and if you then put the hoover on it you're going to start lifting it up. So get all the sanding done, clean up, then mask up. It is best to get a 2-inch or 50mm roll of masking tape. You can use the thinner stuff, the 1-inch, but it does make it a little bit more tricky and almost twice as long to put down, because you do need to put 2 strips down. Now we move the dust sheet out of the way for this part while we put the masking tape down onto the carpet. Now ideally what we want to do is get it as deep down into that groove as possible. So what we'll do is we'll open a stretch. We hold the tape here, hold the tape against the skirting, because then it keeps it up nice and tight. And then what I'm going to do is just lightly stick it down, but it's very tight up against the skirting and it's almost lifted slightly, and that's exactly where I want it, maybe a tiny bit further. Now for the purpose of this demonstration I'm just going to rip that tape off there, and I will mask the rest up in just a moment. So you can see there's a round in one end of the tape here, but I'm just going to stick the rest of it down, make sure it's nicely stuck down, and then from here I'm just going to pull back and tuck in. So I'm just pulling the carpet and the tape back, and then actually just tucking that end of the tape down into the carpet. There. So you can see how that's tucked right down into that groove now. Now here's what you want to avoid when doing any kind of masking. What I've seen some people do is when they've masked up, they'll put it down onto the carpet here and almost left it stuck to the skirting. Now what will happen here is when you come round to painting the skirting and removing the tape, not only are you likely to rip the paint off, but you're also going to get a very visible line above the carpet where it hasn't been painted. So this is not cool. We don't want to do it like this. We want to pull the carpet back, tuck it in, so there is no tape actually stuck to the skirting. Now if you have got any architrave that you need to paint, the sanding process is exactly the same as the skirting. However, we will need to mask around this area here, and sometimes around the architrave can be just a little bit tricky. This isn't too bad, it hasn't got a lot of profile on this, but some profiles or some architraves are very detailed, so it may take a little while to mask, but it is very simple. So what we'll do is we'll just put another piece towards the end here, and I'm using that same technique of tucking the tape down into that groove. I'll just start to cut smaller pieces and start to look at where I can put them. So that piece there will go quite nicely right there, and I just tuck that corner right in there. Tiny little bit showing here. So all we need to do is just add another bit of tape there. So really all you're doing is using the different shapes of bits of tape that you're cutting in order to fill the gaps. Doesn't matter how many pieces of tape you use, as long as you keep that carpet covered. because what you don't want is paint on the carpet and run the risk of either upsetting your missus or the client. There, perfect, that's ready for painting. Now I've done all the masking up, this bit of skirting is ready to paint. What I just want to talk about very quickly is, should I mask the wall? As I've said already, I'm keeping this wall colour, this paint. I don't want to ruin it, I don't want to touch it. So I've got two options. I can either not mask it and just cut in, or I can mask it, which means if I mask it, I will get a very straight line. I do run the risk of bleeding though. When I say bleeding, I mean the paint bleeding, paint bleed through the masking tape. And that will cause a bit of a mess on the wall, which I'll have to fix afterwards. This masking tape is very general purpose masking tape, and it probably will leak or bleed. I've used some other tape, particularly frog tape is quite good, but you still have to make sure you stick it down very, very hard in order to prevent any paint from penetrating or seeping in under the edge there. So I've had a few years experience of cutting in and painting, so I'm not going to do this, but I run the risk of getting paint up on the wall by not masking. So there are pros and cons to it. So I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope I don't mess the wall up. Just before we get started with the painting, I'm going to give the skirting a quick brush with my dusting brush, just to get rid of any last traces of dust, even though I have hoovered. There we go, that's lovely. Lovely and smooth as well. That's so ready for painting. Okay, I'm just going to be using some quick dry satin wood, which means it is a water-based paint. If it's quick dry, it usually means it's water-based. So we'll just crack this open. Hasn't been used for a little while. There's a little bit of settlement going on. So I'll give it a quick stir with my trusty stirrer. Doesn't take long with water-based paint. If you're using oil-based and you haven't used it for a while, you will find after a little while, a lot of oil does settle on the surface. Takes a bit more stirring, but that's ready to go. That's all lovely and smooth. I'm going to be using my Hamilton cutting in brush. Fantastic little brush this is. You can go check out a video of this if you want to. I'll stick the link up there right now for you. How about that? I have wet it, I have dampened it slightly just to protect it a little bit more, make it a bit easier to clean. It's not going to stay wet for very long, as in wet, paint wet for very long, because I've only got this bit to do and then I'm going to go and wash it. So, but do make sure you either wrap your brushes up or clean them as soon as possible after using them, of course. What we can do at this stage is just move the dust sheet closer to the masking tape. There we go, that's good. Just so we really reduce the risk of getting any paint on the carpet. Now, usually I would use a paint kettle, take some of the paint from the pot into a kettle. That would be the best thing to do, but as I'm only doing a short bit, I'm not going to bother. But the advantages of doing that is you don't put any bits of grit or dust or anything back into the pot and end up contaminating it. So I'd always try and pour some of this into a kettle if possible. As I say, I'm just going to dip it straight in. Straight in. So just load the brush up slightly. Now, over a period of time, your brush will end up with more and more paint inside. But for now, I've just pretty much soaked half or a third of it. So we'll start here just by doing a few long strokes just to get rid of some of the paint off of the brush, and then I'm just going to get started with cutting in along the top there. Now this brush really does make it simple and easy to cut in. When we're painting along the bottom here, I would generally use quite a pointed part of the brush like here, and just pressing down and allow those bristles to go right to the bottom of the skirting. And because we've put that masking tape, tucked it right in, there's very little chance of the actual carpet getting any paint on there. So again, I'll just get rid of a bit of paint onto the main part of the skirting here, and then I'm going to come along the top and cut that in. When you're painting skirting, make sure you do it this way, as in along the length of the skirting, because with water-based paint especially, what you will see is the brush marks, and if you start going up and down like this in all different directions, it's going to look a bit of a mess. So keep the brush marks all in line. Now, being a quick dry paint means that the paint dries quick, very quick actually. I painted this about 20 minutes ago. Yeah, I had a little break, had a quick cup of tea, and so I'm actually ready to take the masking tape off. Now, I wouldn't leave it until it is completely dry, because you still do run the risk of ripping or kind of tearing the paint off. You want to leave it so it's a kind of little bit tacky, because where the paint is on the skirting and also on the masking tape, as you can see here, you could quite easily rip a load of paint off if it does dry. So we're going to go ahead and take it off now, and I want to show you the best way to do this. And if you're using oil-based paint, I'd probably leave it a couple of hours before you remove the tape. Again, let it dry slightly, go a bit tacky, then remove the tape. But do not leave it until the next day, because it might get a little bit messy. So here we go. All we're going to do is gently push down and pull away from the skirting now. So I'm just going to rip this bit of tape here, and then I'm just going to slowly pull away, but going to keep this really flat, because what I don't want to do is end up running this or against the skirting and mucking up all the paint. So I'm just going to gently push down and pull the tape away from the skirting as I pull up the tape, and we can do that all the way along. So there we go, we end up with a lovely paint-free carpet and painted skirting all the way below the carpet line. If you do happen to end up with any paint that kind of leaks between the skirting and the tape, you can just grab yourself a flat edge like this and run one side of it right deep down into the carpet against the skirting, and that will just get rid of any blobs of paint and almost make it disappear. And that's how you prepare and paint skirting. Well, I do hope you found that useful, and why not give us a thumbs up if you like the video, and any comments or questions you've got, chuck those in the comments box below. Go ahead and subscribe, that'll be fantastic. I would very much appreciate your support. So why don't you go and check out my website is www.justinbailey.co.uk. I'll stick a link for that down there. And why don't you go and check out my brand new Amazon shopfront. You'll find lots of recommended products on there. I'll leave a link for that in the description box below as well. Cool man, I'm done. I need to get this lot cleared up now. I'll see you next time.